It is before dawn. The air is the kind of cold that does not ask permission. It simply enters you through the thin cloth, through the skin, down into the bones. A man stands at the edge of a wooden barrack. He has not eaten. He can barely stand. Everything that once told him who he was, his name, his work, the people he loved, has been taken. Systematically, deliberately, as if identity itself were just another item to be confiscated at the gate. And yet, through a narrow gap between the planks, light is beginning. Not much, just the first pale suggestion of it. The sky shifting from black to something almost violet, the horizon catching fire in the slow, indifferent way it always does, the way it did before all of this, the way it will long after. And the man stops, and he watches, and something moves inside him that has no name and needs none. He has nothing. He is nothing, by every measure the world around him has applied. And yet here, in this moment, he is unmistakably, stubbornly, mysteriously alive. Not just breathing, but present, reaching towards something. Which raises a question, a quiet one, the kind that once it finds you does not easily let go. What are human beings actually living for? Chapter 1. The Camp. Arrival. His name was Viktor Frankl. He was 39 years old. He was a psychiatrist in Vienna, a city that, in the years before the war, had been one of the great centers of the human mind. A place where Freud had mapped the unconscious and where serious people spent serious hours asking serious questions about what drives us, what breaks us, what makes us who we are. Frankl was one of those serious people. He had spent years developing his own ideas, a theory of the human psyche that differed from Freud's, that placed something other than pleasure at the center of what we are. He had written much of it down, a manuscript, pages and pages of careful thought, hard-won insight, years of clinical work pressed into language. He carried that manuscript with him when they came for him. He thought, perhaps, that if he held on to it, he could hold on to himself. He arrived at Auschwitz in the autumn of 1944. The train had been moving for days. The car was so crowded that people could not sit, could barely breathe. The smell of fear, of bodies, of something animal and terrible. And then the doors opened, and there was cold air and noise and lights, and men in uniforms shouting in a language that cut like a blade. The selection line, the ramp. An officer in a grey coat moving down the row of arriving prisoners, barely looking, barely pausing, gesturing left, gesturing right. Life. Death. No one told them which was which. They would find out later, or they wouldn't. Frankl's manuscript was taken from him. His coat, his wedding ring, his watch, his glasses, each thing removed as though it was simply a logistical matter. The sorting of objects, nothing more. And then they led him to a barber, and the barber removed what was left. He was given a number, 119,104. That was who he was now. His wife Tilly was also in the camps. She would not survive. His mother was killed at Auschwitz, within days, perhaps within hours of their arrival. His father had already died at Theresienstadt of pneumonia in his son's arms. His brother would also perish. There is a restraint required in saying those things, a resistance to turning grief into spectacle. So let it simply be said, nearly everyone Frankl loved was taken from him, and he had no way of knowing it yet. And perhaps in some way, some merciful human way, his mind protected him from knowing it all at once. What this story is about, What it has always been about is what remained. After the name, the number. After the manuscript, the ring, the coat. After the people he loved, after all of it, something remained, and that something, small, stubborn, barely visible, is what we are here to talk about. Chapter 2. The Thread That Held. He was a psychiatrist. Even then, some part of him could not stop watching. In the barracks at night, when the guards were gone and the cold pressed in through the walls, Frankl looked at the men around him. He had nothing left to write with, no paper, no instruments, no clinic. Only his eyes and the habit of a mind trained to notice what others overlook. And what he noticed confounded him at first, and then began slowly to clarify into something he could almost name. The men who broke were not always the weakest. That was the thing, that was the detail that wouldn't let him go. A man who had been strong, who had worked outdoors his whole life, a man with broad shoulders and calloused hands, could simply stop. One morning he would not get up. He would lie there, and within days he would be gone. Not from illness alone, from something harder to see. And then there were others, slight men, bookish men, men who looked as though a cold wind might finish them. And they kept walking, they kept moving through the roll calls, through the marches, through the hunger. Something in them held. Frankl watched a man, feverish, barely able to stand, divide his last crust of bread and hand half of it to the person beside him. It made no sense by any logic of survival. You do not give away what little you have when you are already dying. And yet the man did it. And Frankl saw in his face something that was not despair. There was another man, a prisoner who talked, when he could talk at all, about his daughter. She was somewhere outside the camp, alive, waiting. He did not know exactly where, he could not reach her, but he spoke of her the way you might speak of a fixed point on a horizon, something to walk toward. And that image, that child's face held in the dark of his mind, appeared to be keeping him alive in a way that food and warmth alone could not. A line came back to Frankl, from Nietzsche, a philosopher he had read long before the war. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. He turned it over in his mind. He watched the men who endured and the men who didn't, and he began to believe he was seeing something real. Something the camp, for all its power, could not reach or destroy. An inner life, a reason, a thread connecting a person to something beyond the present moment of suffering. And when that thread held, even when it was thin, even when it was imagined, something in the person held with it. Chapter 3. The Discovery, Logotherapy. Viktor Frankl was liberated in April 1945. He was 37 years old. He had lost his wife, his parents, his brother. He had lost the manuscript he had spent years writing. He walked out of the camps with almost nothing. And yet, inside him, something had not only survived, but sharpened. Within days of his liberation, he began to write. Not slowly, not cautiously, but with the urgency of a man who knows exactly what he needs to say. He dictated the entire book in 9 days. He titled it simply, Man's Search for Meaning. In it, he laid out what he had seen, what he had lived, and what he had come to believe. And at the heart of it was a single, quiet revolution in how we think about human beings. Before Frankl, the two great towers of psychology were Sigmund Freud and Alfred Adler. Freud said that what drives us beneath everything is pleasure, the need to satisfy desire, to reduce tension, to feel good. Adler said no, what drives us is power, the need to overcome weakness, to achieve, to rise. Both were brilliant, both were right about something, but Frankl said they were both missing the deepest drive of all. Meaning, not pleasure, not power, the need to feel that your life points towards something, that it is in some way about something. He called his approach logotherapy, from the Greek word logos, which can mean both word and reason, but which he used to mean meaning. It was, in the plainest terms, a therapy that helped people find a reason to live. Not a technique, not a set of exercises, a conversation with the deepest question a human being can ask. And what happened, Frankl said, when that question went unanswered, when a person had no thread, no reason, no sense that their life held weight, was something he called the existential vacuum, an inner emptiness. Not sadness exactly, more like a hollow at the center of everything, a Sunday afternoon that never ends. He noticed it everywhere once he knew what he was looking for. In patients who had achieved everything they set out to achieve. In people who were healthy, comfortable, safe, and still could not name what they were living for. Think of it this way. Happiness is like sleep. The harder you chase it, the more it retreats. But live a day in full, build something, love someone, face something honestly, and you may find, without having reached for it, that it was there all along. Chapter 4. The question, what is meaning? But that raises a harder question, one that Frankl never let himself skip over, and neither should we. What do we actually mean when we say meaning? It sounds simple enough, and yet if you stop, really stop, and try to answer it, you'll notice something uncomfortable. The word slips. It refuses to hold still. Here is what meaning is not. Meaning is not the same as happiness. A life of deep meaning may include long stretches of difficulty, grief, uncertainty. A parent caring for a sick child is not happy in those hours, but ask them in the midst of it whether what they are doing matters, and the answer comes without hesitation. Meaning is also not the same as success. History is full of people who reached the summit, the career, the recognition, the wealth, and stood there feeling strangely cold. Not ungrateful, not unaware of what they had, simply aware, in the quiet at the top, that something essential was missing from the climb. And meaning is not fixed. It does not arrive once and stay. What gives a 20-year-old's life its sense of direction is not what sustains a person at 60. Meaning shifts as we shift. It asks different things of us at different seasons. That is not a failure. That is simply what it is to be alive and changing. There is one thing, though, that meaning seems always to require. It must reach beyond the self. Meaning cannot be purely private, purely self-referential. It needs an object, something outside you that calls for a response, a person, a work, a cause. A truth, something that was there before you arrived and will matter after you leave. Most of us, if we are honest, spend very little time with this question. Not because we are shallow, but because the question is uncomfortable. It asks us to look at how we are actually living, not how we plan to live, not how we imagine we live, but now, today. And that kind of looking takes courage. Frankl understood this, and so rather than leaving the question open and unanswerable, he went looking for doors. He found three. 3 roads, he said, through which meaning enters a human life. Chapter 5, The 3 Roads. The first road is creation. What you give to the world, what you make, build, teach, grow, write, repair, or tend. Not in the grand sense, not only the painter or the composer or the architect, but in the quiet daily sense too. Think of a teacher who spends 30 years in the same classroom. She does not become famous, her name will not be in any book, but she has shaped the way 1,000 young minds understand the world. She has given something that will keep giving long after she is gone. That is creation. That is the first road. Or the gardener who returns to the same plot of earth season after season. Not because anyone is watching, not because it is efficient, but because there is something that needs tending, and he is the one who tends it. The act itself becomes the meaning. What Frankl noticed is that work becomes meaningful not when it is impressive, but when it serves something beyond the self. When the teacher teaches for the student, not for the grade. When the parent raises a child not as a project, but as a person. The work must point outward. The moment it turns inward, towards status, towards recognition, towards the performance of busyness, something quietly dies. The second road is love. And here Frankl means something deeper than romance, though romance can carry it. He means love as an act of full attention, the experience of truly seeing another person and of being truly seen, not used, not admired, seen. In the camp, in his worst moments, in the cold and the hunger and the fear, Frankl found himself thinking of his wife, Tilly, her face, the way she looked at him. He did not know then whether she was still alive. He would later learn she had not survived. But in those moments, her presence, held only in memory, only in imagination, was enough to sustain him. He walked through ice and darkness and felt, strangely, that he was not alone. Love, he realized, does not require the physical presence of the beloved. It lives in the one who loves. It is its own form of shelter. This is perhaps the sharpest challenge Frankl offers to the modern world, where love is so often treated as something to receive, a feeling that arrives or doesn't, a connection you find or lose. But Frankl saw it differently. Love is not primarily a feeling, it is an act of attention, a choice to see. And in that seeing, in giving your full, unhurried presence to another, meaning does not just appear, it is made. But there is a third road, and it is the hardest one to speak about honestly. Not because it is complicated, but because it is so easy to misunderstand. Frankl called it the road of suffering. And before anything else, he was careful to say what he did not mean. He did not mean that suffering is good. He did not mean we should seek it, or welcome it, or pretend it isn't painful. If suffering can be removed, it should be removed. That is not meaning. That is just unnecessary pain. The third road only begins where the first 2 end. When you are standing in front of something you cannot change, cannot escape, cannot fix. What do you do then? Frankl described it this way. Between a stimulus and a response, there is a space. And in that space lives the last of our human freedoms, the freedom to choose how we face what is happening to us. The camp guards could take everything else, but they could not step inside that space. No one can. Think of a woman, a real kind of woman, one you might know, who sits in a doctor's office and hears the words no one wants to hear. A diagnosis, terminal, months perhaps, not years. And in the days that follow, something unexpected happens. She begins quietly, deliberately, to decide how she will use the time she has. She calls people she has not spoken to in years. She writes letters. She stops pretending. She is not cured, she is not saved, but she is, in some way that matters, free, because she has chosen what her remaining time will mean. This is what Frankl means. Not that suffering gives life meaning automatically. It doesn't. Suffering without meaning is just pain. But when we bring something to our suffering, dignity, honesty, a decision about how we will carry it, we exercise the one freedom that cannot be taken from us. The attitude we choose is still ours. I want to be honest with you. This is not a comfort. It is a challenge, one of the hardest Frankl ever issued. But also, perhaps, one of the most important things a human being can know about themselves. And yet, here we are, living in a world that Viktor Frankl could barely have imagined. A world of abundance, of comfort, of 1,000 options at our fingertips. And somehow the question of meaning has never felt more urgent or more unanswered. Chapter 6. The Modern Crisis, the Emptiness Beneath the Noise. Consider this paradox for a moment. We are, by almost every measurable standard, the most comfortable human beings who have ever lived. We have food security, medical care, entertainment, connectivity. We can speak to someone on the other side of the planet in an instant. We can access the sum of human knowledge on a device in our pocket. We live longer, safer, warmer lives than any generation before us. And we are also among the most anxious, the most depressed, the most medicated. Rates of loneliness are rising. Suicide remains one of the leading causes of death among young people in wealthy countries. Something is not adding up. Frankl saw this coming. Decades before smartphones, before social media, before the particular flavor of modern restlessness, he wrote about what he called the existential vacuum, the inner emptiness that opens up when a person has no sense of why they are alive. Here we are, living in a world that Viktor Frankl could barely have imagined. A world of abundance, of comfort, of 1,000 options at our fingertips. And somehow the question of meaning has never felt more urgent or more unanswered. He predicted that it would become one of the great challenges of the modern age. He was right. We have filled that vacuum, or tried to, with noise, with busyness, with scrolling and streaming and scheduling and consuming. We pack our days so completely that the deeper question never quite finds a moment to surface. And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the busyness is not accidental. Perhaps it is, at least in part, a strategy, a way of not having to sit still long enough to feel what is underneath. I include myself in this. I know what it is to reach for my phone before I have even fully woken up, to mistake activity for aliveness, to feel at the end of a very full day inexplicably empty. And we have also lost, quietly and collectively, many of the structures that once gave life its shape and its weight. Religious faith, for those who held it, provided a framework, a story large enough to contain a human life. Community, neighborhood, craft, intergenerational identity, these too gave people a sense of belonging to something beyond themselves. For many people today, those containers have cracked or emptied, and nothing has arrived to replace them. Frankl had a phrase for it. He called it the danger of Sunday afternoon. That moment when the noise stops, when the work is done, the screen is off, the plans have ended, and a person is left alone with themselves. And they feel it, the void, the question they have been too busy to ask. That feeling is not weakness, it is a signal, the self asking to be heard. And some people do hear it. Some people stop, and in the stopping, something shifts. Let me tell you about 3 of them. Chapter 7, Stories of Return, People Who Found Their Way Back. The first is a woman named Catherine. She spent 22 years building a career in finance. She was good at it, exceptional even. At 44, she was made a partner at the firm she had joined straight out of university. She stood in a glass-walled conference room and accepted the congratulations of people she respected. And then she drove home, poured a glass of wine, and sat in her kitchen in complete silence, and felt nothing. Not sadness, not joy, just a kind of flat, grey quiet that frightened her more than any emotion she had known. She had arrived, and the place she had arrived at was empty. It took 2 years of confusion, of therapy, of conversation she had never allowed herself to have, before she found her way to something. A community garden on the edge of her neighborhood. She had walked past it 100 times. One Saturday morning she walked in. She started small, a patch of soil, some seeds she didn't know the names of. A retired teacher in a worn green jacket who showed her how to water without flooding the roots. She went back the following week, and the week after that. She didn't think about meaning, she just kept showing up. And slowly, quietly, something returned. She told a friend later, "I think I needed to make something that didn't help my career, something that just grew." She still works in finance, but she goes to the garden on Saturday mornings, and that, for now, is enough. The second story belongs to a man named David. His mother died when he was 38, not suddenly, but slowly, over the course of a long illness that he watched week by week from her bedside. He thought grief would look like collapse. Instead, it looked like motion. In the months after she died, he found himself doing the things she had loved. He cooked her recipes. He called her oldest friends, people he barely knew, and listened to their stories about her. He started writing, just notes at first, then something longer, a kind of record. Not a eulogy, more like a conversation he was still having with her. He said, "I didn't want to carry her memory. I wanted to carry her forward, like she was still part of what I was doing." The grief didn't leave, but it changed shape. It became something he could live inside, rather than something that crushed him. He is still writing. He doesn't know what it will become. That is not the point. The third story is shorter, because the moment itself was short. A man named Rowan, mid-50s, a secondary school teacher in a quiet town, had a heart attack while walking to his car one winter morning. He was found quickly. He survived, and in the weeks of recovery that followed, he described something he had not expected: clarity. "Everything I had been worrying about for years just fell away," he said. And what was actually left, were about 4 things, 4 people. That was it. He went back to teaching, but differently, more slowly, with more attention to the student in the back row who never raised their hand. None of these three people solved the problem of meaning. They are all still in it, still finding their way. But something changed when they stopped waiting for meaning to arrive and instead turned toward what was already quietly asking for them. And here is the thing. What these people discovered, what Frankl observed in the camps, what philosophers have argued for centuries, science has now begun to measure. Chapter 8. The Science, What Research Tells Us. In the 1990s, a psychologist named Martin Seligman helped launch what became known as positive psychology. For most of its history, psychology had focused on what goes wrong in the human mind. Seligman asked a different question. What does it look like when things go right? What are the conditions in which human beings actually flourish? His answer, built from years of research, came in the form of 5 elements. He called the model PERMA: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. Meaning was not an afterthought. It was one of the 5 pillars. Without it, the others could not hold the full weight of a life. Other researchers went further. Studies found that people with a strong sense of purpose lived longer, measurably longer than those without one. They recovered from illness more quickly. They showed lower rates of depression, even when their external circumstances were difficult. The body, it turns out, responds to meaning. It is not just philosophy, it is biology. Then there are the blue zones, the communities scattered around the world where people consistently live into their 90s and beyond. Sardinia, Okinawa, the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica. Researchers looked for what these places shared. Diet played a role, movement played a role. But one thing appeared almost everywhere: a sense of daily purpose, a reason to get up, something that needed them. In Okinawa, they even have a word for it: ikigai, roughly translated, the reason you wake up in the morning. Frankl found it in a cattle car. Researchers found it in villages and laboratories. The conclusion, quietly, is the same. But, and this matters, the science can tell you that meaning is good for you. It cannot tell you what your meaning should be. That question belongs entirely to you. Chapter 9. The Last Question. What are you living for? So let us return for a moment to where we began. A man in the dark, cold, hungry, everything taken from him. His name, his work, the people he loved, and yet, through a crack in the wall, a thin line of light. The sun rising, and something in him rising with it. He had no reason, by any ordinary measure, to feel anything but despair. And yet he felt something else. Something that would not be extinguished. Something that asked him, quietly, to keep going. I wonder what that something was for you at some point in your life. Not in a camp, perhaps just in a quiet moment, a morning, a loss, a decision, when you felt the weight of the question underneath everything else. What is this for? What am I for? It is an uncomfortable question. Sit with that discomfort for a moment, because Frankl believed the discomfort itself is meaningful. It means you are taking your life seriously. It means you are still listening for an answer. He said something that I keep returning to. He said that life is not waiting for us to give it meaning. Life is asking us a question, and we answer not with words, but with how we actually live. Every day is a kind of answer. What are you living for?